And a pleasant morning, afternoon, evening to our listeners around the globe. And this is Love the Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, your number one African Caribbean online radio. My name is TYB. Yeah, you know. And I'm glad to be with you this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you may be. We are going to take a different tack today with respect to the happenings in Africa. There's a lot, so many things are happening in Africa. And where else to talk about it? It's right here. And today we'll be joined by a friend, a brother, George Ulobo. We are going to look at so many things, so many of the topics that we really know should be discussed. Because when it comes to Africa, we don't do too much, we don't do too great a job to discuss issues. We've allowed outside forces to define who we are. And it's gotten to a point where we become confused. And by the way, if you are watching me on LinkedIn, Facebook, yes, and YouTube, StreamYard, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, once again, wherever you may be. And those of you also listening to us on Love Day Radio, thank you for joining with us today. It's a different kind of format. My panelists are on hiatus, but I will get to that in the near future. But in the meantime, let me introduce my special guest this morning. I won't say a guest, we are going to have a conversation, so he's not a guest. And whatever it is, we are going to be able to streamline things and make sure that, you know what, at the end of the day, we'll be able to talk and see where we get to in terms of our body politic in Africa. Welcome, George, to this program.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here on Love Bay, and this is a long time coming actually, and I've been longing to be here, and I'm glad that I'm here. Thank you very much for watching us, for listening to us anywhere and any part of the world that you are today.
Yes. You couldn't have said it much better. That's the African way. Yes. Georgia, will you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself? Because like last week, we had an interesting conversation with a brother called Doc. He joined us in, I'm from Juba, South Sudan. It was such a wonderful day and a wonderful conversation. So we are going to have some conversations here, not too deep, but in general terms, how a lot is happening, a lot has happened, a lot is going to be happening in Africa. Because at the end of the day, if we don't talk about it, who's going to talk about it for us and with us?
Yeah.
It's all about us and nobody else. Please tell the listeners, the viewers, who George Willow is. The floor is yours.
My name is George William Wilobo. William being the middle name. Wilobo actually means the world, and that is an actually a Luo name that is very powerful back in Uganda. I was born in Uganda and raised in Uganda, so you'll say I'm 100% African, and for that reason, I have my all my traits and character is so African and so Ugandan, and I come from the northern part of Uganda, where this is that brother that you mentioned that was here in this same studio last week is from Sudan. Now, Sudan is very close to that the part of Uganda where I'm born. So that explains the very dark color, the rich dark color that I have right now in your studio. I moved to Canada sometime in 2017, and started a journey where, of course, I was back in Uganda. I was first of all doing some very wonderful community activities. I was managing projects of United States African Development Foundation as a project coordinator, project management, and staff. I personally studied in Israel. That's in not Tel Aviv, but in a small town of Mizra. And I graduated with agribusiness management, and also back in Uganda, I graduated with biological science, and that placed me in management of agribusiness fields. But I do have like some sort of industrial biotechnology that have acquired with my. So when I moved to Canada, all that kind of flew away because they need me to have a Canadian education, Canadian sort of experience, and all these other things. And it gave me a very big blow after having all these qualifications and after all these years of corporate management and trying to make sure that the world is a better place. And here I was being knocked with a new reality of where I'd moved to, where I thought that, okay, I will be able to pursue like continuous kind of progress in my life. So I settled in here in 2017. By 2018, I was doing any other normal regular job until when I say no, I'm not going to go back and look at myself as a failure, but I'm just going to see this as a system failure. So I had to start on my own business. So you may say now, George Willow, you're talking to is a businessman. So I kind of created some money funnels that I needed to create to enable myself to be an entrepreneur in this country, as I've been trying to create and manage other people's agribusinesses. So I decided to start a trucking company. So I own a trucking business, and then I also support my new African Canadians with employment in terms of, so I connect them with jobs, I connect them to opportunities where they are. And also, after this studio, actually, I'm going to be speaking to new African Canadians that have just come into this country to guide them, to help them settle in. Through other agencies, I partner with other agencies to also organize events. And so you may say I do organize events in terms of like events that bring our African brothers to get information, to understand how these countries, the diaspora operates. Because while someone is in Africa, they depict the diaspora or the Western countries as being very developed, yes, but then they think that this is the cradle of opportunities. This is the cradle of where the dream has to come true at. So that mindset has to a little bit change as well. So we tend to speak to people, to newcomers here in Canada, to be able to speak about the realities that they're getting into, the realities of being here, and what they should expect and what they should not be able to engage in, so that they can be able to progress and proceed with what their ambitions brought them here to do. So, in a nutshell, George is an entrepreneur. George is an advocate of human rights. I'm actually a human rights consultant. I did study that with the college here, and then also George is um, is an advocate for peace. So I'm a peace ambassador for Great Lakes Peace Center, and if you go to the website, you'll be able to see my face there as well. And also George is a planner, strategic planner. I do strategic planning for so many other agencies, including African Center for Refugees, where I'm going to be speaking to newcomers today. And also George is an events planner. So I do organize corporate events, as I mentioned earlier. And in this year, I actually have two events, that is in healthcare and social work, and then in agribusiness. So that's George in a nutshell.
Wow, wow, wow. Great, George. You seem to be a very busy man, and that's how it's supposed to be, because they say the devil finds work for the idle hands, and so
Hmm.
you've done it all. Now
Yeah,
let's look at Africa, for instance.
yeah,
You indicated your background in um, uh, uh, agriculture, if I can put it in general terms like
yeah.
that. It is sometimes, we've done this program so many times,
Mm.
and the discussion has been that it's like you live, you've established yourself, you've created a village by the riverside,
Yeah,
huge river. You can go in and fish, do whatever you can, but at the same time too, you cannot come out and then tell the whole world or tell your friend that you are thirsty. Your village, or you've created an environment where you live by the riverside, and you cannot come and tell me that you're thirsty.
yeah,
I'm saying this to say that Africa has been blessed with sunshine, energy, so much. Even if you put a stone or a rock in the ground, it sprouts, it comes out. And yet, we import food from outside sources. And it sort of hurts me sometimes. I get to pinch myself as to how we've allowed things to go that way. Because somebody told me once, he says, God loved Africa much more than any other continent.
hmm,
God loves Africans much more than any other race. But if you look at us, because He bestowed upon us so many natural resources and human resources, and I don't see for the, from me, you see how I'm speaking out of emotion,
yeah.
why we have not been able to feed ourselves. In 2019, Africa imported grains to the tune of $19 billion from Russia and Ukraine. $19 billion. We have the climate to do it. We have the resources to do it. We have trained agriculturists to manage the affairs. And yet, we depend on outside sources to feed us. Your take on it, please, in general terms.
Yes. So you've asked me actually a very pertinent um, indulgence into something which I practiced for some good time, for some good years. I did some few research as well with regards to agribusinesses in and agriculture in general in Africa, but specifically in Uganda. So this is my take. Number one, there are many folds that plays, like the many factors that play into that. But top of it all is leadership. There is no way or nowhere in the world where there is progress without leadership. Even in your own homestead or house, there has to be a leader. There has to be a leader. If not, if there is no leader in this home, there will be so much of a problem. There will be disagreements. Now, how does leadership play into the African situation in terms of hunger and all these other situations around where they are endowed very well, but then resources, including food, is scarce? Number one, the policies that African leaders pass that is supposed to benefit the people, they are biased to the people. They do not benefit the people in the sense that when there is a village, for instance, because every African uh, town, city, or has a village. Now, the villages have been left out to grow the food that the people in the urban areas actually feed on. Now, the moment you leave agriculture to the poor and you expect them to feed the wealthy, the rich, and the entire country or continent for that matter, there is a problem. Number one, Africa relies on agriculture in subsistence form. they do not. It's just now that some people are starting to see agriculture as a business, and that comes that comes in the thing about agribusiness boost in Africa through African Development Bank and these donation envelopes. Now, the development partners are interested, of course, in those pocket individuals and groups and organizations and all these other businesses that are adding value that are commercializing agriculture. However, we forget the common man down in the villages where they grow this for food, for survival. You and me, while here, we go to work, earn money, and go to the grocery and buy food. In Africa, it's different. The poor family, the family just goes to a garden, till land, or like they dig, they grow the crops when they sprout, and then they make the fruits, and then they harvest, and that's how they eat, and that's how they stock the little, and then continuously do that. Now, how has leadership in Africa failed the poor person or the common person that will suffer hunger in because of the subsistence type of agriculture that they have? The leadership has not provided the subsistent grower with a storage mechanism whereby if this season is good, they will be able to harvest. Back when I was growing up in Africa, we found by the time, because back in the 70s, in 19 between 1960 I mean between 1950 and 1970, there was what they call the societies. Now the societies or cooperatives created what you would call a food bank. A food bank was in every town or every community where food is collected or purchased by the society or the farmers cooperative unions or cooperatives, and then the same food is going to be purchased either by within the country itself and then distributed to the other parts of the country, and people will always have food to eat. Now in the subsistence type of agriculture, people simply grow food to eat, but they don't stock. When time comes and climate change affects the output of the crops, which means there is hunger. So these people did not save up to what is going to take them to the next season of harvest. And now that cycle continues. It's a vicious cycle of which is characterized by policies that should be able to help these people. Number two, I would say is there is a vicious, deliberate way that we have depleted the value of land in terms of like if there is a particular way that we should be able to look at the global hunger or African hunger, we need to look at it into the magnitude of what Africa has as a square land that they have, and then vis-a-vis the activities that take place in that land continuously, day in, day out. The land get depleted, fertilized. The land is not longer fertile for the growing of the crops. Now, what has happened is the mechanization. They tell the farmer that this one will make the garden become good. They're giving chemicals. So when that happens, the farmer is losing the naturality of the soil, naturality of how they will be able to grow these crops. And Africa contains the best organic growing or goods or products that you would find in any market in all over the world. But what is happening right now, they're being told, okay, you need this type of variety of seed to be able to give you maximum yields. Now they're running for that and leaving the indigenous seed that should be able to give more yield in the same type of soil. And also, if you look at how African leaders should be able to embrace the challenges of the common person to be able to create a market within. Because before you look at the market outside, right now every country is trying to look for export. But then the food basket within the countries, the respective countries, are not enough to feed the people. That's why the cost of food is very expensive. in the respective countries. You find a country that produces tea, for instance, in Kenya. Kenya is one of the best tea producers in Africa, but then this tea is sold to some big corporations, and then the same tea that is grown in Kenya is sold very expensive in Kenya. Look at sugar in parts of Nigeria and Uganda, for instance. They process sugar cane in the country. They grow sugar cane in the country, they process it in the country, and they end up exporting the sugar. But then how much is the common person going to afford the sugar that they grew? It's very expensive. So what happens? This person suffers from hunger and then calls upon the leaders to now drums the sound of the common person, and then before you know it, the international community is getting involved, and then they are getting donations of food that they already have. But where is the intersection? The intersection is between policies that should be able to guide and help development versus policies that will only just try to show that the country is exporting and importing to the interest of a few individuals or a business person or someone that is connected within the government that is exporting this product. And that is my take. There is no rocket science about it. It's actually it's doable, because if Canada and these developed countries are able to have one season, but they're able to feed, they're able to grow crops that can be able to feed their, because they are very smart. They tend to make sure that they are able to sustain the demand within before they can send out. So they bring in what they don't have and send out the excess.
Wow. You know, you said what you said is it makes so much sense to me. But I think you touched on an area, leadership, because we don't appoint people to do, to positions, people who are qualified. I should put it that way. In Africa, it's myself. If I win power, it's myself, my friends, and my family.
Mhm.
Whether they are qualified to do some certain jobs and stuff like that, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? And this is where I take issue. Because in Ghana, for instance, where I am originally from, during the Nkrumah regime, the first president of Ghana, he was so pro-African. He was African to the bone. He believed in depending on ourselves. And he said at one point that he was going to map the soils in Ghana. So he established a college, the Kwadaso Agricultural Soil Research, college. So they were able to come up with a map of every part of Ghana where you can grow crops, anything at all, anything at all. And he did it in such a way that there were certain crops that certain industries within the agricultural sector where he sort of mapped out, and then you know what, they created some factories and grew crops that will feed the factories out there. And he was successful. Ghana wasn't importing bags to put in rice and all those kind of. There were so many industrialization, self-dependence. But looking at it right now, it seems as if we have deviated from what we do have. We don't understand and we don't appreciate and we don't understand to some extent or to a larger extent the power that we have. Because if we have the right agricultural policies, we're talking in terms of agri right now. If we have the right agricultural policies, we'll be able to save on so many things. We'll be able to save money for education. We'll be able to save money for the health industry or for the health sector. But in all of this, we are lacking. I think it's lack of leadership. You are, you touch on that. Is it possible to touch on that? Not too deep, but on that score. I think leadership has failed us, and we continuously say it. And every day that we come here, or every Saturday, when we discuss issues relating to Africa, we talk about leadership, and I think it's failing us.
I wanted to give you some information that is really very interesting. While I was doing my research and studying in Israel, I discovered a very astonishing fact. Right now, as apart from the war and all these things that's going on, Israel had what they call the only gene bank, a gene bank of all indigenous food crops in the world. But why was they explained to us and say, in case the world adopts the GMOs, okay, the GMO, or go into the varieties of how to grow food, they are able to reverse. They are able to go back to the indigenous food crops. Now, this is what is happening in Africa. We are not preserving our own indigenous crops or food crops, but we are only adopting species and trying to fund a lot of money into species that are invented elsewhere, and for us to be able to take up that. Now, of course, in one way or the other, it will improve the yields of the farmers and stuff, but then there is one fact that is going to be lost. There are farmers in Africa, large farmers, of course, that grow enormous large chunks of land for apples. South Africa is one of the biggest producers of apple in Africa.
Mm.
But guess what? This apple is very organic. There is no taste of it in any parts of the world. Pineapples, these varieties are extremely organic and you can really literally go into the grocery store and buy the apple, I mean the pineapple here. And when I come back from Africa and I bring you a pineapple, you'll never eat the pineapple here. Now, this is what is happening. They, the farmer in Africa that has these large chunks of pineapple farm, they cannot actually sell that pineapple elsewhere, anywhere in the world. Why? Because if you're selling it as organic, now they have introduced the organic certification. But for you to have the organic certification, if you can go through what they go through to get it, it's too much for a farmer that has invested all his or her life in the farm, the money and the resources. It's too much. It's a lot. Now, our products are not competing favorably, yet they are extremely very valuable products. Right now, if you go, you can take this to the bank and know that when you go to this grocery, there are products or fruits that are tagged organic. They are paying large chunks of money for them. So there is also the commercialization of what you would call deliberate commercialization of certain key value chains or values that speaks to the profits, but not to the development of the people. Because if the global West wanted organic products, where else will they look other than Africa? Where else would they look other than Africa? And if they wanted to develop Africa agriculturally, where else would you not go and buy this stock food? And why would you put a barrier of organic certifications? Even when you've gone to these farms and looked at the farmers simply put a seed down and the seed grows. If you're worried about phytosanitary something and all those bugs that may be in the food, why don't you test them in Africa? Create a laboratory or whatever that you can test what can get out of Africa, other than creating barriers. Now, these barriers that does not allow African products to cross the borders to the Western, because the Western hemisphere contains some big market, high value market. Okay, but then when you look at our products actually are of high quality organically speaking, than the standards that they even put across. However, because of the requirements that are to the dot, like they are so nitty gritty to the extent that some farmers even here do not meet them. So I am still perturbed, much as I'm disturbed by the fact that there is still hunger in Africa and all this, but they are farmers that are actually trying, and they've done so much, including agro processors that are trying to add value to the crops. And for me, I feel that Africa has the largest and the biggest potential in terms of reversing the current situations of food crisis, because Africa is the food basket of the world, without a doubt. However, with the correct and proper like the way we are trying to do right now, we have organized an expo, an agribusiness expo in Saskatchewan, Regina, that's taking place in August, sometime in August. Now, this expo looks into having Africans, is connecting African agriculture sector to the Canadian agriculture sector, where we want farmers to come from Africa, come here and look at what is being done, what the Canadian government, how Canadian government is actually investing. We are even encouraging the governments of we are partnering already with we have written to the Chamber of Commerce for Ghana. We have written to Cameroon, we have written to Uganda, we have written to Kenya, to make sure that they are able to send their representatives, the ministry line ministers or ministry officials, to come and see how the government here prides and invest deeply into the farming sector, the agriculture sector here. Between you and me, when you walk and drive in the countryside, you will see how wealthy these farmers are. In the Western Hemisphere, farming is for the rich.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
Africa, farming is for the poor. So that is a mindset change that has to be, they have to see the value when they are advertising a group of farmers advertising. You know what they put on at the back of their proposition? A poor woman that is actually trying to farm. How will that attract a young person that wants to get into agriculture or agribusiness? So we want to make sure that you show agriculture with success. Don't show agriculture with poverty and suffering. And if it is mechanized agriculture, how is Canada operating mechanically in terms of progress? AI is coming in terms of technology. How is IT applied in Canada to be able to grow a large chunk of greenhouse without even people being involved? The crops are given artificial sunshine, but with just conditions. eh? So how can we be able to expose our people to be able to see all these, open their eyes, because everything is within the scope of where we live. The more you stay indoors and the more you stay where you are inside the box, you cannot get out. You're going to see only within the box as you are being successful, but in actual sense, you're just rotating within. So when they come here through like some of these expos and events that we organize as Global Events Canada, they are able to expose themselves and see the magnitude of how autonomous equipment and how they can be able to partner with these institutions or organizations or companies that are providing or selling agricultural equipment, so that they can be able to take them back home. And instead of just using a tractor, they can be able to at least bring in tractors that also harvest, that also weed. Of course, there are weeders. There are some farming communities that have those equipment that weed, but they are not enough to be able to be rolled out as a commercial agricultural plan or a basis. I love what the projects that African Development Bank is doing in Africa. I love it to the extent that they have encouraged the young people to get involved into agriculture, because the future of Africa relies in the young population. So if you do not empower the young population to adopt or to get into agriculture, who will feed the next generation? None. So I love what they're doing in empowering people to get into agriculture so that we can feed our people, so that our people do not suffer of hunger.
Yeah, you know, that's great. Bringing um, the Chamber of Commerce to come and have a discussion or discussions with their Canadian counterparts or the people involved in the agri industry. Um, don't you think also again that they say charity begins from home or at home, whatever, however it is for? Would it not have been proper? You are doing your part. Seriously, you are doing your very part. But there are certain things that government should even know. Because we have ambassadors, we have agri attaché, trade attaches, and all these kind of stuff, making big money and living out of the country. And it becomes something of a joke. The thing that I'm also against is that, well, the African Development Bank is also doing great, but we hardly hear about them. And in all of this, it's leadership. It's leadership, nothing but leadership. And I take issue with the African Union. If it's African Union, then we have to, if they talk and speak, it should bite. The European Union do what they want to do to protect the interests of Europeans. So in this particular case, I think the African Union should be involved in everything agricultural, because right now, like you indicated rightly, that in Africa, farming is for the poor. In the Western world or outside of Africa, farming is for the rich. So if we should take all these away from and honestly speaking, if we go into reading so many articles and stuff like that, and with reports coming from Africa, is that big companies from the West are buying lands. They are going to farming, big ones, big time. They are giving them huge, lands to do that. And where does the African stand? How do we arrive at that? How do we compete? It's a matter of competition. We don't want to be swallowed, because we were swallowed about 500 years ago, where guns and arms and the Bible was on one side, and the gun was on the other side, and the whiskey was on the other side, and what we know the rest, right? I think from where I sit, I think it will be much more interesting if Africans would take, the destiny into their hands by developing all these places, because we cannot negotiate where agri is concerned, because we don't want huge conglomerates, big companies from outside to come and swallow everything. Well, right, the Africa sits down. Well, Mali said, how long shall these kill us prophets while we sit down, where we sit aside and look? So I think there should be an involvement from the youth organizations to other governmental organizations, non-governmental organizations, to also sit down. There has to be a conversation, a real serious conversation where agriculture in Africa is concerned. Seriously speaking, with your expertise, what's your take on it? Because we cannot allow outsiders to come and feed us. And when it comes to competition, yes, yeah. And I'm saying
Uh,
also this thing. Oh, go ahead, please.
yeah. So with regards to that, it goes back, as you said correctly said, the policies that govern the countries, the respective countries. Now, yesterday I was listening and watching a parliamentary debate while the Ugandan parliament was they were presenting physical plans for the year 2023 2020, I mean 2024, 2025. And while they were making those presentations, the Ministry of Finance was trying to show that they they have all everything is in control. But then there was a revelation of undisclosure of debt. So this is what I picked from the conversation and the debate. The parliament was wholesomely supporting the fact that our own local suppliers that supply the government with products and services are not considered in the as a debt, like as a debt burden, like. But then there is a way they will treat them separately, and yet they will look at the foreign debt as the number one and include it in the budget. Now that is very wrong. It starts with our own, like, how would you treat your own people as the second citizens of, like, second priority? It should be priority that you allow these people to get into business. Number one. Number two, our own investors that are in Africa that might have accumulated their money, they are not given incentives as those that are coming out of the country. In African countries, most of African countries, a foreign investor comes into the country and is given incentives, tax holidays, is given land, free land to actually construct. And guess what? The most disappointing part of that conversation is they are even guaranteed for financial access. So, in other words, which kind of investor is this? Which kind of investor is this that is coming in? They are given land, they are given government land to invest in. They bring in, let's say, 2 million. They claim they have $2 million to invest in a particular sector, and then they are given a tax holiday of a particular period of time, and then they get back and say, now we are not doing development because we need this much amount of money, so guarantee us to get this loan. The $2 million that the person came saying that they have, now the government of that particular country has to again guarantee this person to get this $2 million from a bank.
Wow.
What is this? Now, this goes back to information and knowledge of who is leading our people. Because at the end of the day, who approves this investor in the first place? Who brought this investor? So you'll find that some African countries, you have um, these investors coming with the kickbacks and persons that front them in front of the most important people in the country and say, okay, your cut is this much. And then at the end of the day, guess what? There is no delivery. Our people are shoveled outside the box of development and economy on in the realms of foreign investors that claim to be investors, or investors for that matter, benefiting and reaping the weaknesses of our own leaders. Now, if you take that into consideration, you'll find that most of our African counterparts or our African brothers have the potential to grow, have the potential to develop, but then there is a very enormous challenge of making sure that the policies can protect them, can protect um, their progress, can protect their little investments. Because at the end of the day, if our young people take up these opportunities, where are they going to benefit from, and how do they get back the benefits? Because right now the young people of Africa want results, and you cannot have results if there are no policies that can protect the young person to get into the business and know that they're not going to face the high risk and the barriers that that prevent them from progressing into that very venture. So if you asked me such a thing, that the backdrop that we are facing as Africa is having persons or people that do not qualify to be in certain places or certain positions, making the highest decisions that affect our normal lives. Take, for instance, you have a teacher or a professor of agriculture, but then this teacher does not even have a garden or a farm to show that they are practicing what they're teaching. If you have a practical based kind of tutorship or education where someone that is doing agriculture must be able to have some practical ability to be in the farm itself and to experience what farming means. Now, a graduate of agriculture graduates from gets the qualifications, goes to manage a farm, and he's woken up to the reality that they need to be hands on. This person graduated from college or university expecting to be seated in some office somewhere, somehow, and now is greeted with the reality of being in the farm and having a farm equipment to make sure that they make themselves dirty. Now, that is the challenge because the education system never allowed this young man or woman to embrace the realities of agriculture. So, what results would you get from that person? Person will quit. The person will run to the next simply because they cannot hold, they cannot create independently what is required of them because of the system that was embedded into them. So, for my side, I would think that Africa needs a haulage of um, some of the leadership policies to create open doors for Africans to participate in the development, especially in the agriculture sector. For that matter, I would think that most of the African countries are still having um, a way of subsistence agriculture, but also I believe that there are countries that are making strides in trying to commercialize agriculture. There are companies and entities, enterprises, and also individuals that are enormously participating. However, the governments and the institutions that are supposed to empower them are supposed to either create a market for them, lobby for them, because how can a franchise like KFC buy chicken outside of the country, buy potato from outside the country? It is very unheard of. So I would think that it's very important for us to be able to create opportunities and have opportunities for the indigenous people before we even jump to the foreign people.
You're right. And if you're listening to us on Love Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, we have George William Willoughby as our special guest. And he's going to be a staple on this radio program. And, folks, there's a lot to discuss. There's a lot to decipher where Africa is concerned. There's so many. When it comes to topics on Africa, we have so much. And if you are watching us, please don't forget about the fact that you have to like and subscribe to this channel. And on Saturdays at this time, at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, the program Today's Africa comes into fruition. And we discuss topics of great importance and relevance to the continent of Africa. And George, let's look at intra-African trade. Because you have alluded to the fact that, there's a lot being done with respect to the budget, with respect to everything. Then Africa has 1.2 billion, the population, it's even higher than that.
Yeah.
We are much more than the European Union. How can we accelerate? I know that the AFTC has been signed. How long can we wait to implement it so that we can get a fully integrated African trade, even to go even outside of Africa and then bring our brothers and sisters from the Caribbean to create a block that we can be trading in terms of agric, in terms of so many different areas, so that we become viable, so that we will have the wherewithal to speak and then put our fists on our chest and say, yes, we are speaking. If you talk, we are going to talk. Treat us as equal. How can we do this?
Um, so, my brother, I think it starts with most of some of the agreements that are signed for intra. I, I I find certain things so paper and they're so on the paper, but in the eyes and in the pockets of the common man, it's not a reality. Now, this is my take and this is my observation. Number one, there used to be something called SADC. Okay, now these South African countries had something going on. They had trade among each other, the international trade. Then you have the East African community as well.
Yeah.
That is Uganda, Kenya. And then now, when you have the West Africa with Nigeria having a population of over 200, at least 20,
300 million.
200 million people,
Yeah. Mhm.
over that a million people, that says a lot. Africa has a very large population, which is going to be surpassing even India and China in the very, like, it has surpassed, of course, India, but it will be surpassing China and the other parts of the globe, which combines a very large market force for products within Africa. Now, I believe it starts with the implementation of what these policies and agreements that are being signed. The implementation simply has nothing to do with the rocket science. It has to be looking at common sense. Number one, what are the contributors of trade? If you look at um, the Canada US border, the trade, the free trade area, the free trade zone, it allows someone to work in, if you're Canadian citizen, you can work in USA and pay taxes in Canada, or vice versa. Now, those are some of the free trade agreements that are working. An example of it. Now, let's go back to our African setting, where when I am going to South Africa as Ugandan, I need a passport. I need a passport to get into South Africa, which is in Africa.
Hmm.
So now, how do I, if I, now, if I, that is, I'm just going to visit. Now, how about if I have a product that I want to sell? Now, those are very serious barriers already. Okay. Now, even with the East African community that has been created to empower people to do free trade zoning, there is still a challenge. Yes, they have introduced, actually right now it's the first ever East African passport. They have introduced an East African passport. So Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania have the same similar passport. They have the similar passport. So you can cross to, but what is the reality on the ground? The reality on the ground is there is physical borders
Mhm.
that actually does not allow free trade. When you go to these borders physically, they do not allow free trade. Okay. Now, that is a reality. Even where there is a single passport. Okay. But what would I imagine as the best option? The best option would be, if you're going to have a free trade zone, then make sure that you eliminate physical barriers that does not allow people to cross the borders. Number two, there has to be a way that, there is no indigenous language in Africa that is spoken by over 5 African countries. Apart from Arabic, Arabic is not an indigenous language in Africa. It's not. Arabic is spoken in Morocco, Tunisia, Libya, and other parts of North Africa, but then, and including Egypt. But then Arabic is not indigenous to Africa. Okay? Now, listen to this. Assuming Africa adopts one language, and for instance, East Africa has the indigenous language, which is Kiswahili. Swahili is the only indigenous language in Africa, meaning that if you take up that same device to say, okay, in every African country, let's teach our children Kiswahili. introduce Kiswahili instead of bringing Chinese and Mandarin to teach them. In Zambia, I was surprised and shocked to hear that children are being taught Mandarin
Yes.
in
Yes.
kindergarten to be taught to them.
Yes.
This still goes to the aspect of what we're talking about as leadership, because how do you neglect African indigenous language to start adopting foreign languages that cannot even aid anything? Now, this is why we need a common language for, first of all, African countries. Then Africans themselves, they are not able to correlate with each other where there is no common language. So if you introduce Swahili in 20 African countries, in the indigenous language, which is Swahili, and they are able to speak Swahili and introduce it. Right now, of course, Swahili is the common language in East Africa, right? But then if they're able to enroll it elsewhere, it will aid trade. What would a mindset of an African common person, if you tell them about free trade zone, you know what they mean? They mean they understand it as though there is a marketplace that they will pick their produce and walk into and sell their products, go back home, buy food for their children. But then the reality of these free trade zones, they are looking at large producers, processors, manufacturers, and investors, and lobbyists and bureaucrats that serve their interest. But it does not serve the interest of the common man. The common person that is deep inside just knows he has about 5 bags of grain or 5 bags of corn that he needs to take across the border to sell on the other side because the market is good, and come back when he has nothing and he has the money to buy to purchase food for his family, and that's all they need.
You see, George, you said it right there. You see, it's leadership and education.
Yes.
Education, leadership and education. And we have sometimes, I think there's a lot to unpack here, but I'm respecting your time. And we'll be back at it again next week. And then explore and exploit a whole lot of areas that we feel we should be talking about. We've been talking about Africa. Africa should do this for far too long. So this is the time that we have to do something by letting the leaders know that, you know what, most of you were educated out here. You know the conditions. Most of your advisors were here. Cut back on some of these foreign trips and all those, like do so many things. There are so many things. I become emotional when it gets to this point. But looking at the time right now, George, you have another event that you have to attend to. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking this opportunity, because it was a last minute sort of conversation, and you made yourself available for the program. And on that, I would like to thank you for that. And we will reconvene next week. Next week is going to be very fun. It's going to be very interesting indeed. We have a special guest, Dr. Echaba Sibo. He, well, I'll reserve that for next week. He was in the thick of things during the struggle for African liberation. He was close to the ex-president of Ghana, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. So we are going to be looking at so many different things that should have been done, that the forefathers saw and they started, implementing. I'm talking about forefathers to include Nyerere, Dr. Nyerere, Kwame Nkrumah, and all the patriots. I call them patriots, who came before this time, what they wanted to do, and now we don't see that anymore. It has become a me, myself, and I kind of government, and we lack leadership in Africa, despite the fact that we have everything that we need and that God has given us. We are not using it to our benefit because we don't know the power that we have. Africa has power, but we don't know how to use it. And until next week, folks, thank you for your time and your diligence, and we hope to meet you again. And next week, take care of yourselves and each other. George, thank you, and bye-bye.